Digital Experience Summit. We hope it was a productive day yesterday. I know I enjoyed it a great deal. I'm Maureen Seebacher. I'm Vice President of Simpler Media Group, the parent company of CMSWire, and I'm the Chief Editor of CMSWire. If you ask me what I like about my job, probably the first thing I would say is Siobhan Fagan. Siobhan Fagan is my co-editor, and we work pretty closely together, even though we're separated by, something like 800 miles. Siobhan's in Brooklyn, I'm on the coast of South Carolina. But every day we use our social collaboration tools and we stay in pretty close touch. You're very lucky to have Siobhan as the moderator for this first panel today. She's one of the longest employees at Simpler Media Group, so she knows the company almost as well as Bryce does. She's also very knowledgeable about customer centricity, and I think she's going to do a great job with this next panel. So a round of applause for Siobhan, please.
Good morning, everybody. I threatened Noreen that I wouldn't get up if she went on past my name, but I guess I have to be here now. So, we couldn't have this conference if it wasn't for customer centricity. And you've all heard over the last few years, you have to have the customer at the center of your organization. Small story, I went to a panel a couple of years ago, and not to bring in the big cars anymore, but General Motors, one of their heads of sale, was speaking, and he said something that I was basically waiting for a lightning bolt to hit him after he said it, because he said, at the end of the day, when you look at my competition's cars and our cars that we're selling, there's basically no difference. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that a lot of times when you look at your competition and what you're selling, there's differences, there's small differences, but what you really have to differentiate with is the customer experience. So that's why these people are here today, and I am going to introduce them. To my left is Abdel Tafrich. He is Chief Innovation Officer for Career Builder. And in that role, he is responsible for driving company growth by accelerating innovation across its products, services, and software. He pioneered the company's big data analytics offering, and he currently leads key business-to-business product lines. Next to him is Phil Kemelor. Phil, we've been lucky enough to work together for quite a few years as a contributor at CMSWire. And he is a senior manager of enterprise digital analytics at Ernst & Young. He was one of the earliest adopters and advocates for the use of analytics, bringing 17 years of experience in the field as a practitioner, industry analyst, and consultant. Next to Phil, we have Megan Walsh, who is here from Hilton Worldwide. She's the Senior Director of Global Marketing, and in that she drives the content strategy, structure, and governance that fuels Hilton Worldwide's digital experiences. She also has one of the more entertaining Twitter feeds, if you're ever looking for some fun on Twitter. And then to her left is Mayur Gupta. Mayur I have also worked with on some content, and very happy to be meeting him in person today. He is the Senior Vice President of Digital at Healthgrades, where he's tasked to drive convergence in the healthcare ecosystem by connecting healthcare data and creating context with content and communication. And his blog, Inspire Martech, if you haven't read it, is a perfect storm of marketing, technology, and innovation, so definitely check it out. So, no further ado. Our panel is creating a CX culture, and I think it's good just to start with a baseline of what exactly it is that we mean when we talk about a CX culture. So, Phil?
Well, I think we're talking about a CX culture. We're talking about looking at customers, as kind of like the source of what drives the strategy, and so kind of integrating that throughout the whole organization from top to bottom is kind of the goal of CX culture, and aligning initiatives so that they actually are customer focused, rather than just inward facing outward, which a lot of our clients are trying to deal with that transition today.
Mayur, I see you nodding down there.
I was nodding because it's so broad and everybody's wanting it, but it's so difficult at the same time. And I think the best way to explain what consumer-driven culture or CX culture is by explaining what it's not, right? So I think 9 out of 10 organizations, brands, and agencies are perhaps either technology-driven or channel-driven. Right? Whether that's in our thinking, in our planning, in our execution, we like to think about channels, we like to think about technologies. We, for the most part, have the tail wagging the dog. And the consumer-centric culture is where you stop to think like that. You start to think about consumer behaviors. You start to analyze behaviors that prevent your growth. And then everything you do is catered towards that consumer behavior, ultimately driving that ultimate experience that will change behaviors that will drive participation and engagement.
Yeah, I think for somebody who drove the data division or career career, I've learned over the years. I had an engineering background. I made a lot of mistakes. The biggest mistake I made was it was all about big data. How many of you hear about big data? I think it's a buzzword. What I've learned over the years when I started really taking off our product, big data, I learned is about a big question and a big answer. At the end of the day, innovation, what I'm trying to build in my company, innovation is starting solving client problems. And what does that mean? The biggest challenge that I see with it is how do you operationalize it? And we benchmark constantly with other companies. The company that had operationalized customer-centric is Amazon. Their rating, their culture, I'm going to get into their principle. Everything is about the customer, the obsession. Get to the level where your customer obsession. So let me give you an example of operationalizing. Do you mind if I give you guys an example? From just the technology development. I took over a product development from my tech guys. The developer end up deploying when they're available during the day, Monday and Tuesday. And every time they do a deployment, it might cause problems to the system. I said, did it occur to you guys, we should be more customer-centric? They're like, what do you mean? Did it occur to you guys to look at when the customer log in the system? Ironically, the customer log in the most is Monday and Tuesday. Were you making the most deployment Monday and Tuesday? And we're causing the most problem. The customer don't log in on Friday afternoon or Thursday. When we should deploy? Friday afternoon. So you went to every group, you have to go ask them how to be customer-centric. You just have to have the mindset.
So, Megan, you are coming from what is probably the most direct when people think customer service. You're in the hotel industry. So what does customer centricity mean in that?
Well, there are really two layers in the hospitality industry, right? Because there's the actual experience on property. You come to our hotels, and we hope you come to them a lot. And that is all about you. It is about making your experience at our hotel and on your journey as fabulous as it can be, and do whatever we can to facilitate that. So it's really clear when you're talking about what's happening on property, how to make it customer-centric. Because everything we do, even if it's a digital play, even if it's something like mobile check-in, has an impact on property and impacts interaction with people. So customer-centric there is front and center all the time. It's a little bit harder at headquarters, right, where you're further removed from the actual engagement product. And you've got all the politics at headquarters, you've got budget discussions, you have competing priorities, and especially, quite honestly, most of my career has been on the content technology side, even being in the business. I've also been in IT, and it's harder there to make it customer-centric. To think about what you do in your CMS. How is that about the end customer? And so for companies like mine, I think the in-headquarters conversations and planning, we want it to be about the customer. I mean, sometimes I think we get locked into the way we work, and that's where you need the big change. It's how do you change those conversations, make the customer more real, and connect it more directly to everything that's happening in the office as opposed to just in the hotel lobby. And that's hard.
So you all have very different backgrounds, and I'm wondering if you could speak to any differences that there might be in customer centricity either B2B or B2C areas. Does it look the same? Are we talking the same thing? Is it the same end goal, or are there different considerations that come into that?
I think in a lot of cases it's the same. I actually think the biggest differentiator is B2B or B2C is whether your company is a native, digital company versus a company like actually most of the clients I have. They're traditional companies, so they do, so it's a multi-channel view of the world. So there's a lot going on in digital multi-channel, and there's also a lot going on in conversion, in the real world, let's say through direct, store sales or sales reps, figure into the mix. And I think that's kind of what really changes the perspective about the customer, because if your customer is primarily digital and that's really all you see, it's much easier to come up with personas. You look at behavioral, behavioral segmentation in a way that's more true. If you have to deal with a customer set that's both online and offline, then it's harder to actually link the different behaviors together, link the different personas together. So it's the kind of challenge that our clients are dealing with right now. That's what I see.
Megan, you deal with the online and offline.
We do, but I would say it is still, there is kind of a B2B arm in hospitality for things like events, which is actually more offline than online. But I think companies like mine think of themselves as B2C, and there are very specific needs and questions we want to answer for our customers, and everything focuses on that.
Mayur?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Phil. I think traditionally the gulf between B2B and B2C is dramatically shrunk now. I think simple reason, a lot of the decision making is happening digitally in the online world, right? So even in the B2B environment, the decision makers on the corporate side are looking at everything online. They're looking at content and experiences that are driving decision making. So I think from that aspect, regardless of how different the funnel may be, how different the journey times may be, from lead generation to all the way to conversion and beyond that. But fundamentally, it's the entire experience has to be data driven. It has to understand behaviors that will drive and inspire somebody towards that point of conversion, whether that is the end consumer, or that is your customer on the B2B side. It is ultimately it's that experience. It's the access to information. It is you as a brand, your ability to understand, somebody else's emotional and functional needs, and the ability to communicate that through experiences at a place and touch point of their choice.
So you brought up the data word, which actually brings us to the next question. Businesses have more access to data than ever before, and the collection of the data isn't really the problem necessarily. They have a lot of it, they don't know what to do with it. So could you speak to where the data comes in and how people actually can make it actionable?
Yeah. Well,
Anyone?
Well, I think data is a blessing and a curse, to be quite honest. And I personally, and again, it's all dependent on what industry you play in. I think 95% of the industries do not have a big data problem. It just became the buzzword and whatnot. But ultimately, like you said, I think there's no dearth of data, just like there's no dearth of content. I think it's the ability to transform the data into insights and insight into communication and experiences, which isn't easy because it's not just technology. It's not just, hey, you have tools, you have people who are transforming data into insights, into behavioral segments and consumer segments and whatnot. But I think the key is how do you leverage data ultimately to inspire every single piece of content in a connected way across all channels, which means it's a totally different planning process. It's a totally different mindset. It's a mindset that breaks the channel barriers, that looks at behaviors, that looks at data-driven segments, and uses data to inspire and influence your content strategy. How do you produce and distribute content? Looking at those behaviors, looking at how you want to inspire participation.
So I would agree with that. So one thing I see is that where it's true there's a lot of data, I do think the challenge though is in getting good data and in integrating the data. So, I've been working in this space for 20 years, and first it was just web data, then it's web mobile data, it's social data, and as digital competencies have grown up in organizations, these different competencies all have their own data sets, and no one's sharing. And it's sad. Like, here we are on digital people, and like we're not even sharing or figuring out how to integrate mobile and web data with social data, much less get into these bigger data problems or data challenges of integrating that with financial data or product data, customer data. So I think there is still a real challenge just in getting the data sets aligned, but where it does become different is where we all just used to concentrate like on web data or digital data as a data set. That does change your perspective if you're just thinking about it in that capsule. But if you're thinking about it and ultimately integrating it with the customer data and sales data, then it maybe creates a different data strategy. And it involves a lot more people in the organization. It's not just the digital people who are involved anymore. It's the marketing people, it's the financial people, certainly it's the IT folks. And that's even ironic because for so many years, at least in the digital analytics space, all the vendors were doing everything possible to take data collection out of the hands of IT and put it into marketing, and now we're kind of coming full circle with that.
I think the biggest challenge that I see with data, I think you do need data. But I think data, just like the customer experience, a lot of companies are struggling with it because data is in silo. In order to you have to integrate data to tell the full story. And I think to convince anybody, like Aristotle said, you have to use pathos, logos, and ethos. The emotion. The human beings are emotion. So you have to get the context for the data. So I'm going to give an example I shared with Sharon. A story of, I took over a semantic search. This is a most advanced search team, a technology group. And they sit in the basement, they like to do search, they just like to look at the data. They were looking at the user behavior on our site, and they kept optimizing for this recruiter who kept getting 0 result. And they're like, oh, he's doing his result. He's not getting result. He kept doing it for 3 weeks. They were obsessing about everything he's entering. I'm like, guys, why don't we freaking call him? Hey, I have something. We pick up the phone, we call him. We called them. Hey, all the search that you're doing is not getting the result. You're getting only 10% result. The search you're doing different. You're doing very complex search. He's like, no, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm specialized in IT. Every other position, I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm just handling these things. I'm like, we spent 2 weeks trying to optimize for him. So I think for the data, I'm just saying the danger was just using data. Call people. You will get the full story. Even behind the customer, what we like to do, we look at every customer and employer data. But I think what I like to do is visit them in their own office. Observe them, listen with the data, but also observe them, listen with your eyes. That's where you get the true story. Steve Jobs used to do the same thing. He said he built a store next to his home, so he can go there and have a chat with them, figure out what's the pain point. I think the data can tell the story, but it's really incomplete if you don't have the quality.
I think you bring up an interesting point because you're watching this person's behavior and you're trying to optimize for what you thought he was doing. And so I think a lot of people have difficulty figuring out what the questions are that they should be asking and how they should be asking the questions that don't reveal their own biases, but are actually getting to what the customers think. So have any of you had experience?
Well, I guess I'm just curious, who in the audience uses NPS scores? That's it? Just 1 or 2?
What?
Yeah, so NPS and Net Promoter Scores, and what we find with a lot of clients, especially like in financial services or healthcare, they really focus on Net Promoter Score, which is kind of like it's a survey, or it's a survey-based data collection. There's a rubric that's created by the Bain Group, and it's supposed to give you a sense of how satisfied your customers are. And we find that as a metric and as like a KPI or a way to understand customer satisfaction. A lot of organizations use this. And so I just was curious to see, because I think a lot of organizations are trying to figure out what are the right metrics and KPIs to measure customer experience or understand customer experience or satisfaction.
It's so there's no lack of data. there's challenge in aggregating data because it is in silos, and so it's hard to know if you have the data you need. So you have to spend, having an organized data strategy effort to really put thought into what needs to be collected, how it needs to be stored, how it needs to be accessed, who will be aggregating, how you're going to gain insights, is a really critical part in a consumer-driven enterprise. The hardest part, I think, that's hard enough, and that's really hard. The hardest part then is actually listening to the data, right? So what if the data tells you something that, in our case, the brand may not like so much? You know how customers search and how they pick hotels may not be actually the way the brands want them to do that, and the data proves that out. But does it actually then change the campaign behavior, the corporate behavior in terms of how we're marketing? So we need the data, we need good data. We need to be smart about what data we're collecting, because you don't need everything. It needs to be aggregated and analyzed and understood. And then people have to be willing to listen to it. Because if you're not, you've done all that work for no real reason, and you're going to still have the same problem you had before you solved the data problem.
I think again, we've said enough around the fact that the bigger challenge, bigger than big data, is really data convergence and data harmonization. The interesting thing, and we've been talking about it for years, right? The consumer's been at the center for 5 decades. As industry, we just never been able to execute to that promise. But something's changed in the last 2-3 years, I believe, with this new breed of data management platforms that I believe for the first time has made data harmonization possible across pay one and earn, across offline and online, across first party, second party, third party. So now most brands finally have a true universal understanding of the consumer and consumer behavior, if not real time, just in time, to take action. And I think tying that to consumer experiences and being consumer focused, I think data is the only glue that gives you a shot at perhaps creating a channel agnostic or an omni-channel or seamless, frictionless experience. Without that, you're multi-channel at best, regardless of how big the content is, how great your insights may be. But data is the only signal she's leaving behind as she's hopping from one touch point to the other. And I think that's fascinating, because that's really shifting the focus on how do you connect the dots, with data, but inadvertently you're connecting the dots, across a journey, really looking at her as one human being and not as an email mom or a search mom, or a shop mom. But that's the reality for most part of the industry.
And I'm going to add to what you said, connecting the dot. I think the biggest thing is a lot of internal companies, there are a lot of different teams, they create their own silo. So I'm going to tell you a story of a customer care group that I've worked with in telecommunication. They have the most optimized data. They know by minute how many calls, how many times, and then they show me the metrics. I was sitting with the group. Everything is 90%, 90%, 90%. I'm like, okay, everything is 90%. Why our renewal rate is 50%? So I think you have to tie back to the customer. So I got lucky, I got trained by an earlier serial entrepreneur. We were global. When I started my career, we were a global company. And basically, every country, when you go talk to the country, every country tells them, we're different. One day you got all of us on the call. It's like, I'm tired of hearing, we're different culture. He's like, there is 2 metrics. I don't care what's your culture. If you work in for-profit business, every activity you do should be tied to attracting new customer or retaining existing one. If you're not tied to those 2, an activity, drop it. And he said, everything you measure from different departments, from technology, customer service, sales, should be tied to those 2 metrics. And that's where I think it did help me throughout my career have that clarity. Like customer care, instead of having 90% and optimize your group, why are you telling me how much your group is helping us with the customer?
Yeah. Can I go out of turn? I need to cycle to make sure we get enough time. There's one thing really interesting you said. One is, I think by the end of it, we all know what Career Builder is with all the case studies you shared. But I think more interestingly, you just said something which I strongly believe after having been through at the intersection of marketing, technology, and innovation for many years, and with all the fun challenges, which is how do you incentivize everybody in the organization to the same parameters, the same benchmark? The reason why this whole conversation for the last 4 or 5 years around the CMO not getting along with the CIO, or perhaps the CFO as well, it doesn't matter, right? Because one is incentivized, perhaps looking at the bottom line, right? How do I drive globalization, standardization, cost saving, and much more? And the other one is perhaps thinking about top line growth, consumer acquisition, lifetime value, loyalty, brand advocacy, and whatnot. And there could be somebody else, CFO will have his own objectives. I think the key for organizations to bring that culture of consumer centricity or this notion of consumerism or consumer obsession is when you incentivize everybody to the same benchmark, like you said, whether that is acquisition or retention or measuring behavioral changes or measuring lifetime value, regardless of where you sit and what you do, ultimately that's what matters. And that's why the moment you do that, you do not have challenges and this obstacle around what is the right piece of technology, whether the data should be on cloud or on premise. It doesn't matter because this is what drives behavioral change. This is how you drive consumer acquisition, lifetime value, and growth.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. And like my story is like my first internet job, like in 1994, was with this newsletter publishing company. And there was 2 metrics. And it permeated not just the business operating model, but even the content style. Does it make money or does it save money? And so everything you did as a writer, as a marketer, it had to apply to all that. And it was a very customer-centric company. And, but I think where things start to degrade, you can have that message coming from the top, but it's how are people interpreting it at the mid-level. And I see that in the work that I do now. That's where things break down, which gets to kind of a discussion about governance and priority setting, which I don't see. Actually, we did a survey last year and found that like 50% of the companies we surveyed said they had a digital strategy, 30% said they were actually operationalizing it. So there's a lot of noise or it's like telephone game. Things can get lost in translation from the top down, and that's where you've got to get into standards, you have to get into governance, you have to have definitions that are agreed on by everyone as far as like what the metrics are, what the KPIs are, so that you can keep rolling up to those 2 very simple metrics, and especially with a focus on customer care or customer experience.
Megan, you said earlier, though, that you sometimes have difficulties bringing it into the headquarters, bringing these messages into the headquarters. So does this problem go both ways, where you have people with direct line to the customer and you can't necessarily get the buy-in from the higher-ups?
I think actually it's probably more the other way around, because I think when you're removed from what operating a hotel really needs and requires, sometimes you think a lot bigger. I mean, think about something like mobile check-in, which digital experience developed at headquarters, factors in all of the technology connections on the back end. But that has to function on property, right? You have to know that if you've checked in on your phone and you get to property, you're going to be able to get into your room. That requires understanding how the check-in process works at a hotel, how things are communicated to the hotel via systems, what do the front desk people need to know, what questions do they now need to be able to answer. So it tends to be more, I think, the operation impacts of being customer-centric at headquarters. That transition is sometimes thornier than I think people would like, because you really are talking about a unique individual when they walk into that hotel and go up to that front desk to get their key. And we always have to be cognizant of that. And it can be challenging. It's not that people don't intend to, but sometimes we don't know what the impacts are of the decisions and ideas we're coming up with.
I wanted to bring up a point that came up in a session yesterday. Mark Brennan with Forrester was sharing some of their research and said that the majority of companies, when they were asked what was getting in the way, what was the big roadblock in creating these customer experiences, it wasn't the technology. It came down to budget and people. And I was wondering if any of you could speak to both or either side of that. Mayur?
You know, I would at least agree with one of them for sure. I think budget is a little subjective because on one hand, yes, budget could be an issue. On the other hand, I think lack of budget drives innovation. That's when you get really creative. You don't use safe havens like paid media like we used to back in the day. You would use television. You know, if you have $10 million, put 8 in paid and then think about content strategy for the remaining 2. But I think one of the things which is truly a massive challenge in the roadblock across the industry is talent. And that's because our academia has evolved to respond to the demanding consumer needs today. So I've often said, you know, we all grew up as T-shaped professionals, whether we were T-shaped marketers who went deep in one area, or we were T-shaped technologists, you know, or data scientists or analysts or sales professionals. I think the demands of from a consumer standpoint today, the bar that she's really setting from an experience perspective requires the modern DNA, which is not T-shaped anymore. You know, it's pie-shaped, it's multi-pie shaped, going deep in many areas. You know, some people calling it the unicorns or whatever else. But the bottom line is today the technologist has to be a marketer. The technologist has to be a storyteller. The marketer has to understand, you know, data science, has to understand the suite of marketing technologies, how to apply them. Ultimately putting the consumer at the center, ultimately understanding how do I drive behavioral change. And that isn't easy because we didn't grow up like that. So it's almost this new sort of curriculum within the academia that goes across these traditionally siloed verticals, call it consumer science, call it whatever. But that's the gap we have. And some organizations are filling that gap by creating internal programs, internal universities, as I'm sure some of us have seen. And some academias are evolving now to really have multidisciplinary academics and curriculums to create that.
It's an interesting take on, you know, putting it on education. From what I see with our clients and also from the survey we conducted last year, yeah, technology is not really the problem, or lack of it is not the problem. It is resources. I think, you know, what I see is that companies think they're solving the problem by throwing money at technology, and it's the resources who really need to operationalize the technology are where things are falling down. I also say, maybe it does address your point, that also one of the biggest needs that I see in organizations that we work with, and also again in the survey, that the biggest opportunity for bringing up maturity around using analytics is training and internal training and communication. There's just not enough investment in that within organizations themselves. And that, I think, is another place where you can start to get this multidiscipline professional who might be a marketer but needs to understand technology and vice versa.
But I don't think it's a budget issue. I don't believe in that because I work across multiple industry and across 11 countries. What I find is you have to bring the voice of the customer in product system. You have to go meet regularly customer, collect the data. But also the biggest thing that we don't do enough is define the problem you try to solve. Einstein said, if I have 1 hour to solve the world, I'll spend 55 minutes defining the problem, 5 minutes on the solution. I think people tend to jump too quickly on the solution and asking for a solution. It's not clear what is the problem of the client is solving and how this is going to drive growth. And I think also the resource. I have the smallest team among executives. I have 6 people. And the last 6 companies, I always had the smallest team. I purposely asked the CEO not to give me a big team. And people say, why do you do that? I'm like, because he forced me to network with everybody. I come from Timbuktu, a city of Timbuktu. One thing the drill in your head. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. So every company I've worked with, I built a network in IT. I built a network with a different group. And I think that's how you move them. And then what you do, you take this group and put it in front of the customer. And invite them. I take a lot of the guys with me in client. Why does it motivate them? Because they see them, the impact of their work. The best thing you can do is expose the tech guys, expose the customer service, marketing to the customer. And I think sometimes, and then you use the voice of the customer and say, this is what we're solving. We're going to solve it together. And then you build a team coalition around it.
So I'm going to open the floor up for questions. If there are any questions for the panelists? And if not, I'm actually, yes, over here. One second.
I got the
One
mic.
second. Yep. Mic on the way.
So you had mentioned that a lot of companies are using Net Promoter Score, but you never really gave us a viewpoint on Net Promoter Score. Is it something you recommend, or?
So I think what Net Promoter Scores, what the frustration is with the companies that we see using them, they don't really get into any depth in terms of like understanding what kinds of customers we're providing that kind of input, and they want more information about the customers, like from a segmentation perspective. So Net Promoter Score is kind of like, I think, more like a strategic metric, and you have to really figure out how to operationalize that metric by understanding customer segments, by understanding behaviors at a more granular level. So as a top level metric, great, but you have to figure out really how to use it and how to do your analytics against it that get to a deeper level.
We have another.
We use it, by the way, we optimize it. When we use it at the beginning, it was not optimized. It was just used for customer service. We tie it to the renewal rate. When you tie it back to the renewal rate or something, then you start seeing some pattern.
You know, just to follow up, there's a lot of, there's Net Promoter Score, also some people might use 4C results, These are like, they're just guidance, but like a lot of organizations I see, they kind of stop it with their score as, oh, we went from a 60 to a 70, okay, we're good. And it's not tied to any kind of business goal at all. And that's kind of the false positive with that kind of metric, that kind of tool.
We have another question from the audience over here.
Good morning, folks. This is going to sound unrelated, but I promise I will tie it in. In the software development industry, where developers are building websites, they collect a wealth of data, which I can best describe as big. If you, right now, sitting on the stage, had access to the same quality of data that software developers do about the websites they build, if you had access to the quality of data based on the feedback that you're getting from the audience, it would tell you something as meaningful as the blink rates of the people seated, how often people have gone, whether people are kind of listening to what you're saying, whether they're turning their heads over, or whether they're nodding their heads in appreciation and agreement. And you would know this in real time, and it would come up on the screen in front of you, and it would say, the thing that you were saying right now is hitting home. And you would have that data in front of you. And it would be a matter of simply knocking on the door of the IT department and saying, can we have access to that, please? And they might say, yeah, sure, where have you been all this time? And where have you been all my life? And I hear a story about the different departments of your organization simply needing to come together and share the data that they already have. So I'm going to throw out a patent pending idea. I'm thinking there should be somebody in an organization who kind of drives this sort of get together, a chief something or other officer, and I will call it, this is my term for it, a chief executive officer. And if organizations had this theoretical chief executive officer, what would you do as marketing technologists to empower her to bring these departments together?
Mayur, I know you have some strong thoughts on this one.
So, first of all, I don't know if the world needs another chief something. Because it is, I think we have enough, and it's only fragmenting. It's only creating a problem that we're trying to solve. But I'll say, the way I'll say it is what organizations need is a supply chain for marketing. That's what we lack. So the entry point of data is not a problem today, and I think you gave some great examples, and it'll be great for the next year's DX Summit to actually have some sensors and eye recognition so we can all see it. But I think the key is how quickly and with what agility are you able to respond and connect that data to everything else. And that's just not in the sense of transforming the data into insights. It's also how quickly are we able to take that insight and transform that into communication that will drive behavioral change. And underneath that, I think that's where we often drop the ball. So could that be underneath one person within an organization? Not sure. I think it's challenging because the supply chain of marketing spans across everything from data to technology to IT to the world of marketing, to the different agency partners, because the communication that is data driven now requires content to be produced, creative assets to be produced, a mindset shift that's looking at testing and learning, right? That's looking at analytics performance. That's now saying, I should tweak something. Do I need an approval? Which means now the brand's coming. So I think in order for us to become a data-driven organization, which is consumer-focused, every single element of the organization has to be involved. And again, how do you do that? You do that when you become consumer-obsessed, when you measure your growth, when you measure your own performance based on those behavioral changes, based on acquisition, retention, lifetime value, whatever the measures may be. And everyone has to feel accountable for that.
And my experience hasn't been that the different organizations don't want to share the data. They do want to share the data. The problem is actually understanding what you have, how to get it in a reasonable amount of time, being able to synthesize and aggregate it because data structures are different and it was put in this type of database and this one's stored over here. And so being able to pull it together and gain the insight is the challenge. I don't know of anybody who doesn't want it. I think people are just overwhelmed about how hard it is to do, especially when you have years and years of data that is scattered, and people are trying to solve bits and pieces of it rather than addressing the big picture. And it's why I think starting at a data strategy level and having an enterprise approach to it, not to make it bigger than it can be to solve, but it actually is a business problem. And it has to be, you have to invest in it, and it has to be given priority. And if it's just little projects here and there trying to tie pieces together, you're never going to get the whole picture.
Great. Well, I think that we are going to end the session there. Thanks to all the panelists for coming here today, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your attention. That was a great roundtable. Our next speaker is a man who wears several hats. Scott Wheeler is a vice president at Leapfrog Online. He's also a marketing instructor, or lecturer rather, at Northwestern. And he knows a thing or two about the imperative of data-driven insights. And he's going to share that, as well as how you can structure your organization to take advantage of the data that's available to you. Scott?
Thank you. I'm going to find the clicker first. It's the magic. Good morning, everyone. I'm very lucky to be following that panel. A lot of great thoughts, and thanks to the DX Summit team for putting together the content structure this way. Hopefully this will carry forward several of the ideas that that panel was just talking about. I won't spend too much time on the introductions as you were just given my introduction. So I'm going to start with one of several metaphors that we'll be running through in this presentation. We're going to start with a tale of two experiences. So these two experiences are really meant to be one experience. This is meant to be the customer experience, the consumer experience, the digital experience. But as was discussed somewhat up here and through several conversations over the course of this conference, there tends to be some lack of unity between what we say we want to do and what actually happens, which is probably why many of us are here. So this is about how do we bring that together. So, and a little lag here, so I can't go back. So the slide that I just missed was a consumer who expected a nice smoothie. Oh, there we go. So the elves are helping today. That's great. So the consumer experience that we want to deliver is this experience. We have a consumer out of many consumers. We identify her. She's the one that we're talking to right now. She's engaging with us through several channels. Within those channels, we can deliver all sorts of content, all sorts of content. And then we can probably, this slide can be improved by building another circle around this, which is her journey. So we can say, awareness, consideration, et cetera, all the way through the conversion. So we've got this person going through several steps, using several devices, engaging with all sorts of content that we're able to deliver. And ultimately, what she expects is relevance in what we're delivering, right? That's our content objective. She expects consistency across the channels over time. She expects clarity. I don't want to get lost in what you're trying to tell me. Low friction, transparency, social proof. So this is the experience. This is what we want to deliver. This is the journey that we want. Now, as has been mentioned frequently, on our side of the journey, we have these walls and silos, right? So we frequently refer to the silos. And in the last conversation, and often, and in my role as well as a digital analytics person, as a digital analytics lead, we tend to start this conversation by saying the data is siloed, right? We're not getting to the data here yet. The problem is that the functions are siloed, right? And this is just within marketing. So to extend this metaphor, I'm going to say that just within our acquisition to conversion process, and then possibly post-conversion experience, we have an email budget and somebody who owns email. We have a call center budget and someone who owns the call center, a paid search budget, a website budget, online display, and then organic social off in a field somewhere, not protected by our organization that well. And then if we think about the rest of the organization, this is a kingdom, the marketing kingdom, right? Then there's the IT kingdom. Then there's maybe, the separate BUs and the brands have their kingdom. And within those kingdoms, they've got their own castles, their own walls, their own silos, and so forth. So we've got a consumer who's expecting consistency, relevancy, and a frictionless experience. And then we've got our organization. And so the question for today is, how do we rearrange our digital experience management to bring people inside the walls, right? To bring people inside our walls. How do we rearrange our digital experience management to support those expectations and to drive engagement? The first change is shifting our mindset from inside-out thinking to outside-in thinking. Okay? This is also frequently mentioned as becoming customer-centric. Right? The alternative to that, if we're not customer-centric yet, is that we're self-centered, right, as an organization, which is an easy thing to be. So if we're thinking from the inside out, if we're thinking from sort of our purposes, what it is we're trying to achieve, and then we want to get customers to do that, right? Then, and we're each in our silos, then the way that we see the customers through this little narrow slit, we see them as they move past us in this journey that they're taking, and then they move on to somewhere else in the journey and they leave our view, right? If we have this type of organization, then I promise you, the consumer sees us as this other picture. I'm trying to get something out of this organization. I have to put up my ladder and scale the wall, right? How am I going to get in there and actually make this happen? How do I facilitate this happening, right? There was an example yesterday of trying to get cable, calling, canceling, calling. That's this, right? This wall, these towers are speaking to each other. I have to scale this wall. It doesn't work out well. I have to put up my ladder and try again. So that's one change, and that's an important change. And I'll say that there's a change that even incorporates that, or has to happen before that can happen. And that is being data-driven, right? So we heard about big data. Is big data a buzzword? Yes and no, right? I mean, everything is a buzzword. So if you use it a lot, it becomes a buzzword, but it doesn't necessarily mean it loses its meaning in the right context. Data-driven, we talk about that a lot. Just because we talk about it a lot doesn't mean that it also doesn't have meaningful context. So data-driven is how we know our customers, right? We talk about being customer-centric, but we're not inviting people into the room, sit down in the chair, please tell me what you're shopping for, and here, let me help you out, right? How we know about each customer at each point in this experience is data. Right? Data is our understanding of the customer. So if data is our understanding of the customer, and we say that we're putting the customer at the center, then inevitably we have to be putting data in the center. Right? That's what goes in the center of this experience, because that is the proxy for the customer. And data is sometimes a good proxy for the customer, and data is sometimes a crummy proxy for the customer. Right? Data is a crummy proxy for the customer when we've got web tagging and we run some correlation. We say, oh, neat, people who buy tend to have clicked learn more somewhere in the experience. So, ergo, to get more people to buy, just put learn more buttons all over the site, right? That's crummy customer experience data, right? Some people were clicking that, but we can't draw that conclusion from the data. We have data, we can make a hypothesis about what that means for the experience, but we have to think reasonably as well, right? Data can be a good proxy for the customer when it actually tells us about their motivations, when it tells us about their experience, what the blockers are in the experience, why they're here, have they been here before, what is their value to us, what is our value to them. That's all good data. So this diagram tries to get the idea of how the organization can work with data. The data-centered organization can work with data. We've got within marketing and digital experience, we've got these functions. We've got our research and forecasting function, right? And ideally, our data is not only behavioral data, transactional data, digital data. Even for digital experience, we don't need to limit ourselves and shouldn't and certainly can't limit ourselves to, oh, well, what can we collect from the digital channels and then leave it at that, right? We have to have research as well. We have to understand the consumer. Again, there's not a segment of people who click learn more and people who don't. And if I can just create a 100% learn more segment, then I'll have perfect conversion, right? That's data from the customer experience, data that we're drawing out of the digital experience. But there's something, we really need to get at the motivation of why is someone clicking learn more. There are people who don't know enough about us, and there are people who feel they do know enough about us, right? How are we marketing to each of those interest-based segments as opposed to those behavioral segments? So research and forecasting tells us what are the questions we should be asking. And it also tells us how do we expect to perform if we answer those questions, right? So our research can be ethnographic, can be focus group, can be traditional research methods, and can of course be data collection as well. It's right next to the behavioral context collection, which is really more of that digital sensor machine data coming. And forecasting then tells us, all right, and if we do this, and if we do it well, how many transactions can we expect to see? What type of conversion? Against what products? How does seasonality impact this? How will competitive actions impact this? So research and forecasting gives us some sense about who we're working with and what's likely to happen when we engage them. Strategy and planning, then, if we follow the blue arrows on the outside, we pass this along to strategy and planning. And strategy and planning says, all right, then, here's what we're going to do. Given these circumstances, given these conditions, given these types of consumers, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we pursue certain goals, right? Our set of objectives, our KPIs, and I like that very simple notion in 1994 of does it save money, does it make money? And you'll see why in a moment. But what is our strategy? What is our planning? What are we pursuing? Saving money, making money, and how does the customer experience, the digital experience, drive both of those, right? That's the question. Pass along our strategy and planning to the creative UX design folks, experience architects, etc. They will deliver this, how it goes, and then we measure our performance. Along the way, we're either drawing from our data or we're passing data back in. There can be arguments made for arrows going both ways in all cases, and that's great. The idea is, though, that if we're consumer-centered, we're data-centered. Now, if we're data-centered, we'll find that people want us to measure things. Right? And in fact, this is really the origin of being data-focused, is being performance-focused and bringing back what's the impact of the business, right? Then we can start to think about, and what's the impact of the consumer. But the first question we're going to be asked with data usually is, what's the business impact? And so I call those efficiency-focused metrics, right? And this comes back to that example that I'm glad is still alive and being carried forward from the lovely simple days of 1993, which is, are we making money or are we saving money, right? Are we efficiency focused? Are we finding a way to do what we've always done more efficiently? Take the same budget and find me a few more customers for it, but I don't want to increase the budget. Or find me a way to get the same number of leads at the top and draw some of that budget back. We see that a lot in research and forecasting, right? How do we become efficient? In strategy and planning, we get into the combination of efficiency and effectiveness. So now effectiveness is, all right, my efficiency metrics and my forecast told me that if I spent this much, I could expect this much return. That presumed that there were certain conversion rates that were happening. Now, what if I can get better at converting people, which is, again, the reason that we're all here. Using digital experience, using content experience to get better at creating customer experiences that gain us customers, keep us customers, win us new customers. So how do I become more effective? Now certainly, the creative and UX design folks and the content experience delivery folks, they're focused on effectiveness, right? You can tell them I'm taking some of your budget away, and they'll still try to be effective with that budget, right? So their focus is naturally on effectiveness, and then we get back into our performance analytics, and we come back to efficiency. And of course, the problem here is that when we're in an organization that begins with an efficiency focus, and then effectiveness sort of comes up when we hand it over to the creative folks and the content folks and the experience folks. Okay, here's what we forecasted to happen at this budget, now you try to make that happen. And we wind up back at this other side where our metrics are ROI and our, you know, our various costs per and so on and so forth, and we're interested in these things. What happens in between gets a little bit lost to the rest of the organization. We're talking about what happens in the middle, what happens at the top, what are the metrics that we're interested in at the top, and what are the interests that we're interested in the middle. And I would argue that when it comes to performance metrics, we tend not to see, and this was, I think, part of the intent about the Net Promoter Score question, we tend not to see customer satisfaction really factoring into ROI, except for as maybe, you know, do we have customer experience satisfaction metrics as we go through this? And if those are limited at the top, then the understanding of what we need to do to move through this cycle with data that's driven around the consumer experience versus driven around efficiency will be a little bit lost as well. All right, so there needs to be an efficiency and effectiveness balance, right? And so efficiency, our Prius, is all about maximizing resources. Okay? And organizations love to do that, right? And if you talk to the actual CEO, they'll probably be all about it, right? They'll say, oh, yeah, well, you know, can we do that for less? And so we can focus on efficiency. We can run models and so forth, marketing mix or media mix models, and we can do segmentation to figure out, you know, where we want to target our dollars. We can run attribution analysis to figure out what channels are contributing to what. Programmatic bidding, so that we're only bidding on people who are going to be valuable to us, and we're only spending a certain amount in that programmatic bidding. And then, of course, all of our performance metrics. And this is going to help us maximize our resources. But of course, we're not going to go off-road in the Prius, right? We're not going to go blaze new trails and go climb a mountain in this machine that's built for efficiency. When it comes to effectiveness, right, we've got a little bit more torque, we've got big wheels, you know, now we're not as worried about our gas mileage and so on and so forth. It's a little bit more costly, but we can go into this uncharted territory. We can go off-road. And I'm going to mention Peter Senge in a moment from MIT, and I'm going to introduce this idea now, right? What we want to do to compete and win, to differentiate, which is the way the last panel was open, right? If we're not differentiating around the actual features and functions of the products, and we're differentiating around the experience, and we believe that there's an opportunity to separate ourselves from other brands in our market by that experience, and we haven't done it yet, right? Then we're looking for a non-obvious source of high leverage, right? If it were obvious, we would have done it. So what we're doing with analytics and becoming consumer-driven, what we're really saying is we want to find the thing that motivates the consumer that the other brand doesn't know. And then we want to execute on that first and fastest, right? So we're looking for non-obvious sources of high leverage. How do we gain leverage in driving this experience to win in our business, right? So the effectiveness focus is the only way to identify these non-obvious sources of high leverage, and we can do this with testing. I love testing, right? Testing optimization, this means we have to formulate a hypothesis that may not come from the data. I'm the analytics guy, people come to me all the time and they say, well, we want to make a decision about what to do differently. Can you please analyze all of our prior data and tell us what we should do differently? And I look at them and say, so you want me to look at what we've done before and tell you what we should do instead? I can tell you what we shouldn't do anymore, right? I can tell you what's not working. I can tell you where we can stop. What I can't tell you is what people would like more if we haven't asked them, or we haven't experimented with it, or we haven't tried it. That is not in the data that we have about our historical operations. That is not in our big data set. We only can analyze what we've measured. And if I haven't measured what people would like us to do differently, then I can't tell you a hypothesis about that from the data, okay? So save your data people some trouble and don't ask them to write hypotheses about what to do differently from data about what you've been doing before, because it can't happen. This is about strategy. This is about being a marketer. This is about coming up, understanding, and again, this is why we start with research, right? Going out and asking those questions. Again, running content UX testing. running cross-channel optimization, trying things. What is scenario forecasting, right? Moving from our historical data scenario forecasting to saying, let's think like farmers who, they have all this historical data about their crop yields, they have all this historical data about the quality of their fields, they have all of this forecast data about weather, but how well can weather really be forecasted, right? And so I can build these models that have all of this historical data, and then I can say, so what should I farm this year, right? At that point, the farmer, and there are lots of models, predictive models that come from agriculture that are applicable to marketing for this reason. There is a need for expert opinion in forecasting. There is a need for hypotheses in forecasting, for an ability to say, this is what the data tells us, this is where the data ends, now I need to apply some judgment to this, right? And so this is foreshadowing what the role is of management when it comes to being data-driven. So we become data-driven, and there was a question here at the end of the last panel about, what if you had your implants and I was feeding you real-time information about the response of the audience, and you were able to analyze that, and then change the content that you're delivering accordingly. The performance barrier there is going to be the human processing power, right? So we can have all this information coming in, and the quality of the visualization would matter. And I could respond to it in sort of real time, but at some point still making decisions at a human pace, particularly if I've got lots and lots of information coming in, I've got to make lots and lots of decisions quickly about what content to show, how much to spend on showing that content, what to offer within that content, building dynamic factors around that. At some point, I might need to turn this over to a machine. We have content management systems that can do this, and marketing automation systems that can do this, and we feed them rules, and then eventually we go from rules to algorithms, and we say, you make the decision, as long as I give you this information, and I want you to meet these criteria and optimize to these objectives, you make these decisions, right? So is machine learning really self-driving strategy, right? Rather than saying, I'm deciding that we should show this type of content to this type of person and this type of content to this type of person. I measure things about you when you arrive, or I measure things about you as you consume my content, and I determine, okay, how am I going to optimize this to you right now, right? We have this historical real-time data and these statistical models. We're able to optimize budgets. We're able to target the best qualified leads. So the question becomes, what's to decide then? Right? And this was sort of the question posed before. What are managers deciding in this case? Right? And bringing our metaphors forward several centuries now, from the castle metaphor, do we need to be driving the car to get to our destination as efficiently and effectively as possible? Google's answer is no. Right? They're betting a lot on, no, you don't need to be driving the car. And I would say the analogy holds true in some respect regarding the experience that we're creating as it's delivered. As it's delivered, and that's my big caveat. Do we need to be driving the car to get to our destination as efficiently as effectively as possible? No. And in fact, with so many customers, so many different motivations that we can uncover through statistics and machine learning, so many different touch points to engage with them within, we need algorithms and automation to track, analyze, optimize these experiences. Right? So this is data, this is the marketing automation tools, but the manager needs to facilitate this. So to carry forward the analogy a little bit, no, probably there are some destinations on well-paved roads in well-mapped areas where we can just kick back and let the car take us there, and actually it will pick the most efficient route. I'm amazed all the time when I drive in my neighborhood and I use Google Maps. Some of the routes that it picks are just really counterintuitive to what I would think of, but it winds up saving me gas and saving me time, right? In my neighborhood. I don't need to know how to get there. It's just interesting to see how the algorithm optimizes the path from where I am versus allowing me to use my bias and all of my prior experience in getting from point A to point B. So we still need to pick the destination too, right? This is the other challenge. We don't want to get in the car and say, take me where you want to go, right? So we need to facilitate. We need to tell the car where it's going, right? We need to facilitate by assembling data, content, analysis, and delivery methods. This means deciding to spend money and time on integrations, right? And on RFPs for tool selection and on implementation and so forth. In those decisions, we need to decide what are we automating and what are we going to continue to drive manually. That's a big decision. That is a big management decision, right? And it's not, I'm going to make this decision every day, right? Which is what some managers are accustomed to. I want to come in, I want people to run stuff by me, I want to make decisions, and then I want to go home and feel like I drove the business forward, right? This is, I'm going to decide what decisions I'm giving up for the rest of the time. Okay? That's the challenge for for managers who are still going to be managing in 5 years from now. I'm going to decide what I'm just going to stop worrying about, what I'm going to give up for the rest of the time. And that's a threatening thing, right? That's a challenging thing when what you're accustomed to is coming in, having people run things by you, making decisions, and then out it goes. There are other things where you're going to say, but you need to run these other things by me, right? The next place we're going to go, I'm going to decide that too. And then the place we're going to go after that, I'm going to decide that too. And if I'm really good at deciding where we need to go next, and I'm really good at making these decisions about prioritization, integration, automation versus manual, and so forth, I'll get to keep making those decisions about where we're going, right? So I'm not necessarily driving the car anymore. That's the management imperative that I'm giving up. I don't have to drive the car all the time, but I do need to make sure we get there. And I need to make sure that there is a good place for us to be. How to monitor, when to respond, right? So what kind of analytics are we using in order to know whether this is working? So the management imperatives that I'm going to argue now are the ones that we need to be thinking about when we think about building data-driven, consumer-centered organizations. Right? Are twofold. One is the automatic car is going to hit something like this, right? We're going to say get from point A to point B. It hasn't been mapped that well before, right? Because we're trying to do something that we're trying to gain some non-obvious source of high leverage. We're trying to do something that we haven't mapped before. We're going to drive into a field, and the field's going to be subdivided with all of these fences, right? So how do we then jump back in, take the wheel, and find our way around barriers, right? So that's management imperative number one. We've decided where to go. We've allowed this to be automated, but we hit some barriers. And then the second one is going to be what happens when the road ends, or we have choices to make that weren't mapped out before that. So here's Senge. How many of you have ever read Peter Senge or know anything about him? The Fifth Discipline, MIT prof. So you know, what's interesting about MIT, and I really didn't realize this for a while until I started wrestling with organizational change around ERP system implementations originally, and then around social media analytics, and now subsequently around all of these marketing analytics and consumer experience analytics. MIT, not only do they do great engineering, but they have a couple amazing programs in organizational change. And as I thought about it, I said, this makes a lot of sense, right? How many amazing entrepreneurial ideas that could change the world come out of MIT and crash and burn because people don't get it. People don't get it because it doesn't look like how we've done it. I can't really, it's not an incremental change, it's a leap, right? So in conjunction with this engineering expertise has emerged this organizational change expertise. And so Peter Senge, who runs this MIT Center for Org Learning, has introduced us to this idea of systems thinking, right? And so this is not the IT or engineering idea of systems, right? Or rather, it's the parent of that. It's the idea that there are interconnections, things that work together. That is a system, right? So I put something in here, there's an output, and there's a bunch of things that happen in between. Right? And I won't read the quote in full. I will just say that his point is that we're all part of systems all the time, right? The way that this conversation functions, which is not very conversational, is a system. It's been designed to work this way. You sit and listen, I stand and talk, and we all have our roles to play in it. And for the most part, the system operates as planned, right? And so, you may say, boy, I wish I could ask a question now, but that's not how the system was designed. You may say, I hope I can remember this question until later, and then maybe I'll answer it in the meantime, and that was hopefully how the system was designed. But we all are part of the systems that we're in all the time. We contribute to those systems, right? We're making everything happen that we're involved in all through the day. We're part of making it happen. So his observation here is that systems thinking is about understanding where we are in the system, understanding our part in contributing to this system as it operates. And when I talk about the system here, I'm talking about where we work as we try to become more customer-centered and data-driven, right? Our challenge is, how do we understand the part that we play so that we can gain this perspective to allow us to leverage insight as to what we might do differently in pursuit of these non-obvious sources of high leverage. So how do we do this, right? We're saying we want to become data-driven. And I will say that I also have never found anybody who who would argue against merging data together, right? Who would say, if we could make this happen, I would love to have access to that data, and I would love to contribute my data to you, and so forth. I have found lots of people who don't want to believe what the data says. Lots and lots and lots of people, when we give them the analysis and say, this is what the data says, they say, it doesn't really seem like what I've observed for the last 20 years in my experience. Or it doesn't really seem like what I'm getting out of my funky, clunky, build-it-yourself system off of 5 Excel databases that people are manually putting stuff into. There's no one would say we shouldn't have data, but when it comes down to, okay, so here's what the data says, oftentimes there's a barrier, right? And it's asking people to change. It's asking people to allow the decision to be made outside of their head as opposed to inside of their head, right? Here's the best thing for us to do. Not asking you, here's the best thing for us to do. This is the analysis, right? And so what gets in the way of this, right? Well, in our systems of day-to-day life, we get into routines, right? There's probably routines established here already in terms of come in, find your coffee, come get a seat. And so we quickly establish routines as human beings. It limits the intrusion of new stimuli. It allows us to go about our day. It allows us to go about our work. Leave energy for the things that we have to do within the routine, right? I don't want to think about where the coffee is. I want to find the coffee easily because I want to think about other things. So we're efficiency maximizing animals, right? We're trying to maximize how we go through our day, what we spend our brain power on, and what we don't. And so we build these routines, we build these assumptions, so that we don't have to think about everything all the time, right? The poor philosophers are broken in this, but everybody else is able to just say, I'm not going to worry about why that is or how it is. I'm going to just go through this, assume this, and move along. So is this efficient? Yes. Is this effective? The argument is, when it comes to change and being data-driven, it's really not that effective, right? So what I just introduced to you was a heuristic called the familiarity heuristic. Right? We refer to these as heuristics or biases, and there was mention of biases in previous panels, and this is the challenge when it comes to data, right? Is overcoming our biases. The heuristic I just mentioned is the familiarity heuristic. This is that we like to establish things that are familiar to us. We like to establish routines so that we can save our energy and our brain power for other things. This is directly contrary to the idea of being data-driven, right? So in the sense that we go into work and go through our routine, are we functioning in a way that we're enabling a data-driven culture? And again, remember, when I say data-driven, I am saying consumer-centered because that data is about the consumer, right? So are we thinking about the consumer? Are we thinking inside out versus outside in? Am I focused on what does the data say about how our experience is driving consumers versus do I need to get the TPS report out by Friday? I really have no idea how that impacts the consumer, but I'm going to put this together and get it out, right? Social proof. This is another heuristic, which is a tendency for individuals to conform to activity they observe from others in a group. Okay, this is problematic, and I'll explain why in a moment. And then the third heuristic that gets in the way of organizational change for data-driven culture for a consumer-centered organization, or flip around, data-driven organization for a consumer-centered organization, is the escalation of commitment. Okay? How many of you have played an escalation of commitment game ever? It's a fun game to play. I might have a student or two here, and I might ruin this for them, but this is a game you can play. You can do this with even 3 or 4 friends over cocktails sometime. Say that you have $1, and whoever bids the most for this $1 between your 2 friends can have it, right? The bidding will start at, you're not going to start at 10 cents, so this doesn't take forever. And say, oh, there's one rule. Let the bidding start a little bit. Say, oh, guys, I forgot, there's one rule. Maybe 3 people playing better. Whoever is the second place bidder has to pay me what they bid, right? So I'll give this $1 to the first place bidder. But if you lose, you've got to pay me what you bid. That's the cost of being in this game, all right? You want to continue? Okay. So bidding goes. Somebody's at 90 cents. The person who's at 80 cents says, oh man, if I don't bid $1 on this, I'm going to have to pay 80 cents. All right, I'll bid $1. Now the person who's stuck at 90 cents says, oh man, if I don't bid $1.10, I'm going to lose 90 cents. But if I bid $1.10 and I get the $1 back, I've only lost 10 cents as opposed to the 90 cents I'm about to lose. $1.10 for the $1. $1.20, because I can actually cut my losses or reduce my losses a little bit, and that math goes on for a while, right? You're saying, well, this is still better than having to pay that 80 I was at, or that 90 cents I was at. And it goes on. So this is escalation commitment, or often referred to as the irrational escalation commitment. It's something that's hardwired into us to some extent to just do our logic in a way that maximizes benefit within some very narrow constraints, right? And it's hard to move beyond those constraints. So a tragic example of these that I use to make this point, and luckily, none of us are in the boat of having to make decisions or deal with situations that are this significant. This is an engineering diagram that was put together just before the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger was launched, and it exploded shortly after launch. And it cost the lives of everyone involved. There was knowledge before the launch that it was going to be cold that day, right? It was going to be really cold. It was going to be 26 degrees to 29 degrees Fahrenheit in Florida, right? So this is really odd. This is anomalous. And the engineers were really worried about this because they had observed in lots of previous launches that when it was cold, this thing called the O-ring broke. And the O-ring, the rubber that it was manufactured out of it, didn't work really well. When it got cold, it got real brittle and it cracked. And they said, look, the coldest that it's ever been during a launch, was about 50 degrees, and we had this serious damage, right? This O-ring damage, right? We had this serious damage out here, and now you're telling us you're going to launch it out here. It's almost a sure thing that this is going to break, right? The engineers put this together before the launch, and they brought it to launch management. And launch management said, yeah, well, wait, can you go back again to the helpful people? I was looking for the point. Thank you. The launch management said, yeah, but look, it breaks sometimes when it's warm too, right? Maybe there's just something wrong with the O-ring. So maybe this time it's not going to be. People also argue that, well, look, there are some times when it was cold down here that, it wasn't that bad, so that's just anomalous, that 50 degree. Can you really say that? And then the engineers also put together this chart that had things like wind speed on it, and this was kind of confusing, right? So there are problems with this visualization, and when I talk about visualization, I talk about, the engineers really didn't focus on a particular problem. I think that what they used on the y-axis was probably problematic because they should have shown the percent significance of difference versus this effort at a scale. And so there were things that you could have done to show the extremity of the danger better. But ultimately, the larger problem probably was that there was nobody in the organization that was supposed to cancel launches, right? So data-driven organization. I got this data, I got this analysis. We're really worried about this. This is not going to be a good astronaut experience, clearly. We need to do something differently, right? But we've got data about everything we've done before, and I, as a manager, can look into that data and make a counterpoint to the argument you're making, right? So I can be data-driven too. I can say, well, actually, look, no, there's these times when it's okay. And also, I think you should talk to Bob about this because I don't really think it's my job to cancel it, right? And it got passed around, and these heuristics were already there. Familiarity, social proof, right? Looking over, well, what did he say? Did he say we should cancel this? Well, no, he said we should talk to you. No. Well, then let's go see what he thinks. No, well, what did you guys think? Well, I don't know, what do you think? Well, let's go ask them, right? And so this just got passed around. Nobody's job to say no. In the routine, go fever. And so being data-driven is hard, right? In the most extreme consequences, with the most extreme consequences on the line, because of heuristics, being data-driven is hard. So your moment of zen after that is to say, you need to be the change in the organization, right? Because you're thinking about being data-driven and having a consumer-centric organization. Business decisions should not drive consumer experience analysis. Consumer experience analysis should drive business decisions, right? Tattoo that on your knuckles, so it's a little long, and then go back and then tell people, oh, look, your business decisions are impeding what I can actually begin to think about in terms of the consumer experience. The organization should not shape the CX analyst. The CX analyst should shape the organization. And I say this to empower people who are actually producing that analysis, right? It doesn't matter that this is the CEO and this is the analyst. The analyst has the data and the insight to tell the CEO what to do. The CEO says, well, that's nice that you have this analysis, but you're just an analyst, I'm the CEO. Thanks for the data. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I run the company, so we're going to do what I think anyway, right? This is not going to help with being a data-driven organization. So a plug for somebody else's book. This is a book by Dale Connor. It's been around for a long time now, but he introduces these notions of change agents, and that's you, advocates who are influencers but not sponsors, sponsors who are providing political capital and resources, and targets people who need to adapt to change. So there was a conversation in the panel before about the top level, the bottom level, how do we make this happen? I'm going to plug this read if you're interested in how to go back into your organization and facilitate change, right? So what about where the map ends? And we're close to where my presentation ends as well, but Peter's saying he's going to come up one more time. So in the same notion of systems thinking, he says, and as a manager, I have to be prepared to be wrong, right? I have to be prepared to be wrong, and as the point I made before, if it was obvious what needed to be done, we'd already be doing it. So the fact that I haven't made better decisions yet, or the fact that I haven't used data to make these better decisions yet, I'm not going to blame that on somebody else. I'm going to start figuring out how to use this data better, right? And if I'm not ready to challenge my own mental models, these heuristics that I just mentioned, then my likelihood of finding these non-obvious areas of high leverage is low, okay? Examples of like this abound. This is an example of really good IT, really good systems integration, the belief that data should be merged, all put together. British Airways, this was published in 2012, spent a couple years merging these 200 data sources to inform customer experiences. And their CMO, who was overseeing the experience, said, so we spent most of this time building the infrastructure to support the number crunching, but the piece that is harder is getting the plane crews to recognize the importance of reading notes about passengers and then delivering them a certain message, right? So they spent a couple years merging systems, got the data together, cleansed it, built all of the analysis, gave all of their flight crews tablets and said, as people are getting on, we're going to tell you a little something personal about them. This person usually flies in business class and is flying with their family today and is back in coach. Make sure you bring them the champagne anyway because they'll really appreciate it, right? The note is there. It broke at the front line. Right? So having the data, deciding what the experience needs to be, wanting it to happen, and then driving that change down into the organization can be a challenge. Expect inertia, right? And so this comes to this point by McKinsey, build frontline capabilities, right? And hopefully you've heard the statistic. They were recommending at this time, and this was in 2013, that really it should be something like 50-50 a budget for a data-driven consumer experience project. 50-50 that should go to frontlines versus analytics versus the 90% on tech and data and the 10% on the frontline. And then finally, change agency. What systems thinking is about is people have to account for their own patterns of thought and interaction, right? If we want to be consumer driven, then we need to figure out that we're part of the organization that needs to change, right? And so the change is going to start with us. And so there's a quote here from Bill O'Brien, the CEO of Hanover Insurance. He built this insurance company up from scratch, very hard-nosed CEO. But observed, that throughout the course of building this business, whenever he tried to get somebody to do something, the success of doing that depended on his internal condition, right? And so he characterized that this way: the success of an intervention, we're trying to get our organization to be more data-driven. We're trying to get our customers to engage with us in a certain way. Depends on the interior condition of the interviewer, of the interviewer, I should say. And this comes from this idea also out of MIT. From a place called the Presencing Institute, which is really interesting notion, that there's this structure that I'm about to show you where we go from downloading the organization, this comes back to the familiarity of social proof heuristics, and use new information and visualization to bring the best possible future into the present, okay? So Presencing Institute sounds a little bit like, something that you'd find in Big Sur or something, but actually at MIT, and what they're saying is exactly what we're saying about being data-driven and consumer-centric, right? Using new information and visualization to bring the best possible future into the present. That's what we want to do for our businesses, right? That's what we want to do for our organizations. So downloading is taking what we've always done and getting what we've always gotten, right? Presencing is deciding what it is that we want, envisioning what it is that that's going to be, and pulling it into the present. So another book plug, Theory U by Otto Scharmer, if you're interested in this topic. He takes us through the objective structures and systems that drive an organization. These are the org charts, the established tools and processes. This is what we have to work with, right? Then there's the who you know question, right? You're supposed to work this way. Here's how we structured your organization and your team. But yeah, when I ask you to do that report, I know you walk down to the second floor and talk to this person because they're the one that really does it well, right? I know that you go outside of the request protocol and ask your buddy over here on this team, what's the best way to get this done? So these are the enacted structures and systems. And then there's the personal structure of an admin. If I ask you like a jerk, it's not going to work, right? Even if I know the right person to ask outside of the organizational structure, there's these perspectives, attitudes, and then the biases and filters. Do I know that I should step outside of this structure to ask you this? So a poll from his book, this is this notion of, this is why this is called the Theory U, because the idea is that if we're going to transform our organization, we're going to go through stages of transformation. And so now we're moving from the individual to the organization. Most organizations are in one of these top two stages, right? Downloading, talking nice, right? Where we say, we want to bring all our data together and be customer-centric. Great, we want to do that too. Great, thanks for the meeting, see you later, right? And so we all talk about what it is we want to have happen in the transformation. Then we get to debate, talking tough. We disagree with the way we should do this. I have my point of view, you have your point of view, and we're going to disagree about that, right? We have to get beyond that into reflective inquiry, right? Seeing ourselves as part of the whole and saying, well, we both still want the same thing, so let's go from defending my position, defending your position forward, and finally into presencing. So this is a great read in that respect. And so we finally end with a plug for my book. The publishers say they promise will be published this month. There's lots of these ideas and others in there, and there's a 20% discount, which is why I'm plugging this one time, and I'm never going to mention it again. And I also just want to give you the even more useful piece of information over here, right? That we talk about data a lot, right? Big, right? Data is a coin that has a head and a tail. That's data, right? Information is whether I got the head or the tail. That's information, okay? So knowledge is, was there something meaningful riding on that head or tail? And then wisdom is, should I have bet on a coin flip? So, we think about data, and we talk about data a lot, but that's just the beginning of a process of putting the picture together. I know my time is up. I am happy to take questions and chat and breaks, and I really appreciate you all listening. Thank you very much.
Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It is break time, folks. We hope you take the next half hour to talk a little bit about what you've heard already. We have coffee across the way in the Experience Showcase. Take a look at the vendors, the technologies, the swag that we have over there for you. And we will see you back here at 11 for a really interesting late morning panel before the lunch break, where we have some stuff you're not going to want to miss. So enjoy yourself, and we'll see you back here at 11. Thank you.